I invite Cordell Schachter as the first speaker.
Thank you, Kaan. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for rushing back from lunch to join us here today. There's seats up front, in case anyone's wondering. As Kaan said, I'm the Chief Technology Officer and CIO at New York City's Department of Transportation. If we in our cars were both on Facebook, our relationship status would be, it's complicated. Like all relationships, it's involved compromises and trade-offs, and we're still together after over 100 years. To make this relationship last so long, we've given up a lot of privacy to get more public safety and convenience on our roads. Let's review what happened to help us forecast what comes next. And we'll see if we can continue this relationship and its important compromises as we share the road with connected and autonomous vehicles. Our story begins in 1901, when license plates were first required on automobiles like these. At first, they were supposed to consist of the owner's initials and a number, but not so many owners used their initials and random numbers. So this original vanity plate didn't last very long. What was supposed to be personal information, traded for accountability, wound up being random information. In 1910, the state began making its own license plates and issuing them to automobile owners to put on their vehicles. It formalized the exchange of personal information for the license plate and to use the vehicle on public roads. Also in 1910, chauffeurs and professional drivers needed to obtain an operator license. Originally, they had to wear badges identifying them, but due to safety concerns, a more detailed system with greater accountability was needed for the chauffeurs. They had to provide a lot of information about their appearance and their photo. I'm not sure if you can see in the back, on the right side of the license has a lot of personally descriptive information about the chauffeur. And it took almost 30 years after that, in 1934, for the state to require that an operator pass a driving test before receiving a license. The license didn't change much for many years. This is a license from 1976, and with the addition of height, eye color, and whether the operator had to wear glasses, not much had changed from 1917 until 1984. In 1984, the New York State driving license was upgraded significantly to include a color photo and fraud protection features in the license itself, to making it more difficult to counterfeit. It provided more assurance that authorized drivers were actually operating vehicles, and it also coincided with the states raising the alcoholic beverage drinking age to 21, serving both purposes. In 1993, Easy Pass arrived in New York State on the New York State Thruway. And with it, we provided personal data and financial information to pay our tolls in advance for more convenience while driving. The toll tag allowed the Easy Pass system to log our location with the time of day every time the tag was used. As drivers, we didn't have to worry about having cash or exact change, and the Easy Pass lanes had shorter lines than cash pay lanes. In addition to our gaining greater convenience, law enforcement agencies could access the logged information with the right authorization. Consistent with the idea of our sacrificing personal information for the sake of increased public safety. For many years, some people refused the convenience to maintain more privacy. That's all gone now with the elimination of toll booths for paying with cash and the scanning of license plates at toll locations, capturing personal and travel information even when cars don't have toll tags. In 2000, there was another significant milestone in personal information for convenience when traveling by car. In New York City, taxi cabs began accepting credit cards. It took years for the system to be fully rolled out, but in a vehicle so equipped, passengers no longer traveled anonymously by paying cash. For the convenience of using their credit card, they provide their identity and financial information. The pace of change now in the 21st century has moved more quickly than it had for most of the 20th century. In 2010, Uber Taxi was launched in San Francisco. That's what it was first called. In 2011, Uber arrived in New York City. And a full 2 years later, the city finally recognized Uber and other ride-hailing app services. In the ride-hailing app model, we give up our personal and financial information, and now we also volunteer our origin and destination information, all for the convenience of hiring a car with our smartphone. We also receive increased safety and reliability. We in the company now knew our driver in advance, increasing accountability and equity, and making it less likely they would refuse to drive us based on personally profiling us or our origins and destinations. The ride-hail app model also provides more safety for the driver. They know who they're picking up. Passengers and drivers have a surer and safer ride with the increased accountability offered by exchanging their identities in advance. So how do things look for the future regarding personal privacy and street safety? In 2019, as you all know, New York City expects to hit the streets with its connected vehicle pilot, which is designed to provide privacy and security. To briefly summarize a couple of this morning's sessions, in case some of you missed them, in this system, basic safety messages about speed, traffic signal phase, and potential crashes will be transmitted between specially equipped pilot vehicles and between New York City DOT's infrastructure and these pilot vehicles. The system will anonymize pilot participants and their data to protect their privacy while also maintaining security of the system by confirming that only authorized parties are transmitting messages in the system. You need to know that only authorized parties are exchanging messages so that false and potentially dangerous messages are not interpreted as authentic, leading to big trouble. US DOT is funding our $20 million pilot and ones in Tampa and Wyoming, and they're committed to maintain connected vehicle anonymity and security at scale after the pilots. And how about the far future? Robot cars like these arrive when? We don't know when. We do know that except for the very wealthy, we won't be owning them because we can reasonably predict that all of the technology on board will make them very expensive and most likely for higher fleet vehicles. We can also reasonably predict that all of the personal information we've provided over the past 100 years to drive and to ride in for higher vehicles will also be required for us to be driven by these robot cars. We won't be able to ride in them anonymously. For over 100 years, we sacrificed our privacy. We've made ourselves more transparent and even risk that our data might be used in unauthorized ways, all to improve everyone's safety and for our convenience. But how about the robot cars? What information should they be sharing to make us safe? Shouldn't the autonomous vehicle companies share some of their data with us, especially their safety data? So far, they haven't shared much. How do we really know that their robot cars operate safely among people-driven cars and will operate more safely than the people-driven cars, as they claim? How do we know that their security systems will keep our private data and their systems safe from imposters and hackers? We've learned a lot lately that many of our leading tech firms and financial companies have been hacked and have exposed our private data with little consequence. We've also learned that imposters have infiltrated these companies' systems and even influenced the last presidential election, also with little consequence. We also know that in the US, some of the same companies that want to put their robot cars on our public roads have been recalling more vehicles each year than they sell. That's not a great record. We need the autonomous vehicle companies to share test, performance, and security information. But so far, they've said and showed us almost nothing. And it appears they don't really hear our concerns. We need a larger community of engineering, safety, and security experts to confirm the claims of the autonomous vehicle companies that their robot cars are safe and secure. That will allow us to see if our sacrifice of our data, our personal info, our secrets, and our independence will be traded as before for increased safety, in this case, by the robot cars. That's been the deal for the last 100 years. And the robot car companies need to get on board. Thanks for listening.
As I said, we'll take a couple of questions. If you have any questions right now, if you don't, this is really a great segue to our three other speakers, so we can continue with our next speaker. Any questions? Okay, there you go.
You know that there's no consequences to any of the private sector entities that pull data from people like us, but they lacked the security to keep that data safe. So they were hacked maliciously, and our data became available. Do you see the solution as legislative or about action within existing legislative, existing legal frameworks that are already available? Who should be acting? Who should be holding them accountable?
So I think it's clear that the private companies, whether they're the autonomous vehicle companies, the credit card rating agencies, other firms, haven't taken affirmative action. So that the government needs to step forward, and our representatives at least need to propose legislation. When that happens, sometimes then the industry organizations band together and say, you know what, I don't really like your legislation. We'll propose something that we can live with. And there becomes a negotiation between the industry trade groups and the government, the representatives who are proposing the legislation. I think in all these cases, what's needed is a shared risk model, so that each side of the equation, the customer and the provider, bears some responsibility when bad things happen. If we only use passwords that are password, or we don't elect to use two-factor authentication, then we may be sacrificing some of our ability to take action should something bad happen. On the other hand, when we're willing to comply with all that, the companies storing our data, monetizing our data, would have responsibility if we upheld our end of the bargain. And it's the current state of many IT systems and maybe this is going to bleed over into autonomous vehicles as well. The Silicon Valley saying that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. So we've gotten accustomed to all these free things, yet the lack of a contract and the acceptance of terms and conditions that we've never read allows these companies to act and fail with little consequence.
Thank you. Cordell.
Thank you.
So the rest of the program, we have 3 speakers from Tandon School of Engineering. As you know, we have a great cybersecurity program, and actually each speaker is doing some different aspect of what we're talking here. So I'm going to invite to the podium Professor Panwar from Tandon Electrical and Computer Engineering, and he will give us a presentation on ultra-low latency 5G networks for control and coordination of autonomous vehicles. And then we'd like to thank you for taking time and presenting.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for that. It preceded me. I think it put a lot of issues in perspective, from the city's perspective, about security. So what I will do instead is talk about the pipes that carry that information and how fast that can be done. Because I think we are entering an era where the latency is becoming a huge issue, and how fast you get that information off and on these automated vehicles. So we're all familiar with our cell phones, 3G, 4G, and the next generation is 5G, which will be with us next year. And what distinguishes 5G from previous generations is not just the bandwidth. There will be bigger pipes, better pipes, carrying more data, higher data rates, but also the round-trip delays will drop by an order of magnitude. And this is based in part due to the kind of applications we discussed in the Symposium, automated vehicles, but also in other areas such as augmented reality, virtual reality, where you want a very short time for things to be rendered in front of you when you using one of those goggles, or haptic communications where hand gestures, etc., have to be sent over the network, and the response has to come back in a very, very short time for it to be very natural. So driven in part of that, what we're doing at NYC Wireless is research in 5G networking. We are one of the leading centers in this area. And I'll highlight some of the issues with 5G which are particularly relevant to this audience. So if you look through some of the vendors, this slide I've stolen from Nokia, their labs. What they are focusing on is what 5G can deliver in terms of bandwidth. So they're talking about 100 megabits per second, a gigabit per second each device. But the other interesting thing, which I think is sometimes overlooked, is they are bringing down latency to under 10 milliseconds. That is under 10 milliseconds for you to send out some information to your base station and for it to come back within that 10 milliseconds, or perhaps even less in the later iterations of 5G. So that, when I talk to my colleagues in control theory and robotics, etc., is a very important threshold, because at those numbers, a lot of the control actions that people are assuming are taking on-board vehicles can be off-board. Okay, and so let me discuss that in a little bit more detail. So what we have is, if this promise of 5G is fully realized, is that latencies, which are currently about 50 milliseconds in 4G phones that you have currently, will drop to 10 milliseconds or less. So many of the control loops which require something like 10 millisecond or less response times can now be moved out of the car, the self-driving car or whatever, go to the base station, be computed using unlimited power, unlimited computational resources, and brought back to you within 10 milliseconds. So that has its advantages. And if you are talking about looking at further in the future, perhaps if you're looking at flying autonomous vehicles, weight, battery power, all of these are constrained these vehicles. So the amount of payload they can carry. So if this can be moved out, you have more payload available for those kind of vehicles. So you can move this to edge computing, which is this technology where instead of all computations taking place in the cloud somewhere in Utah or wherever, is brought close to you, close to the base stations, close to the edge, so as to reduce the latency and the round trip delay. In addition to that, given this real-time monitoring of these vehicles that this will enable, will allow you to do planning, congestion avoidance, traffic control, and all the other functions can be done more easily. So there's some lots of news. So we're looking, there are certain control loops which require response times of under milliseconds. So that with current technology will have to stay on board. And as you all know, as cell phone users, there are always red spots and signal block and possibly signal blockages in buildings. And so how do you deal with that? The fact that you may not have it everywhere all the time. So in 5G, as an interesting aspect, one is in the current band that we all use in our 4G phones will continue to evolve and merge into 5G. So that band, given the nature of microwave signals, is much more reliable. It can go around the edges of buildings. It can penetrate human bodies, and so that's how we get reasonable coverage there. Will continue to evolve, but has less bandwidth. At the same time, 5G is also moving into the millimeter wave band, which offers much larger bandwidths of the order of gigabit per second or more, but has a trade-off there. The trade-off is that you can be blocked. At those frequencies, it's very easy for even human body to block signals. So that is the current technological challenge in 5G. But the advantage there is that you can get much higher bandwidth. So part of this future is how do you split traffic between these two bands? The lower bandwidth, which is reliable, or much higher bandwidth, millimeter wave band, but which will suffer from more blockages and interruptions. So depending on the needs and the constraints and the quality of service requirements, you can split between these. So this will require some careful design. How to oops, I have, okay. Maybe I have to think through all of these. I know how I did that. Talking about, okay. So, how you split between these two and how you split the computation between the on-board vehicle and otherwise. Okay. Yeah, thank you. And is something else that we have started looking at, and how to keep some on board and some off board. So I'm not going to give you technical details, but just give you a kind of high-level view of what we are doing. We are looking at the effect of blockages on 5G. This is Central Park on the right, and what happens if you have people walking across the park and how they can potentially block signals in the millimeter wave band, and how to model it, how to mitigate that. We are also looking at the network protocols associated with this. By the way, I don't have a slide on this, but along with Columbia University and Rutgers, we are setting up a large test bed with the help of New York City in Harlem over the next 5 years, which will bring all these technology with the help of the vendors to test out many of these concepts. So there'll be, I don't know, a 20 or 30 block section of Harlem where we will put up these using experimental licenses from the FCC base stations and run these protocols and networks. We'll have vehicles with receivers, transceivers to test all of this and see what we can achieve and what little applications can run on this. So, again, I will not get into the details of this, but everything has to be re-engineered from the bottom up in order to meet those latency requirements. What was acceptable in 4G in terms of delays, this is about the transport control protocol, is no longer acceptable. So Google has its own solution. We are finding problems with that, so we're working to fix those. Just as an example, even the tiniest of delay jitters on those links ripple all the way up to the protocols, right up to the applications, and affect their performance. So all of these delays, which are in the 100 microsecond range, have implications right up to the application level if you're trying to keep those latencies down by an order of magnitude. And so the students are working on this. We're contributing to this protocol. And we are finding that there are some fundamental limits on how much you can push this. So that's area of research. Another interesting idea is that in the millimeter wave band, as I said, the base station may be visible to you, and you have a nice line of sight connection to your cell phone or your vehicle. And you turn the corner, and that signal will disappear, and you'll have to switch to another base station, or a truck will come in between you and the base station and block your signal. So there'll be a lot of flipping going on between different base stations. And if you're going to keep your promise of 10 millisecond delays, this has to be done, again, at an extremely high rate and extremely quickly. And again, current networks don't do this. So this is another area that we are looking into how to facilitate that. And this is just one idea where we are assuming that you can circulate all the data for a particular user to all the base stations in the area, so that if you're connected to any one of them, you will get your data. And so rather than the current method where you sort of reroute the traffic each time you get blocked by a base station. So that's all I want to talk about today, and I'll take questions. People in the company is supporting us in terms of doing research in this area.
So when you talk about that balance between the 4G and the 5G, might this be one of the first solution steps we might consider, where the outgoing or the mission critical command signal is 5G and the return signal could be 4G?
So the current 4G band is more reliable than lower bandwidth. So for critical but low bandwidth information, like command signals you're referring to, it may be best to keep it at sub 6 gigahertz. On the other hand, if you are doing any kind of scene analysis, image analysis type work as part of your decision making, you may want to send that over 5G because that requires much higher bandwidth. So that could be one of the scopes.
Any other questions? This is your last chance because she has to go give an exam.
Yeah, that's the disadvantage of being close to the venue of a conference that you go in and out. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Professor Justin Cappos. I've known Justin's work since I came to NYU. It's very interesting work on cybersecurity of especially cards, but other things. I think this is a very interesting talk about the software that he and his team developed, and they're trying now on many automotive industry products. So I'm looking forward to hearing this presentation.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction. So I am a professor here at NYU Tandon, as is Shiv and Siddharth, who's going to be speaking next. So as a professor, one of my rights I get as being a professor is I get to have a pop quiz. So pop quiz here, you see all these companies, all these logos. What do these companies have in common? Well, they're all major tech companies, right? In fact, I think everybody here would argue that they probably, in fact, have some of the best security teams in the world, looking at these tech companies and their logos. Well, it turns out that all of these companies have had users of their products attacked through a hack related to their software update process, right? So this should concern anyone in the room who works for a company that has software, which basically every company that deploys hardware now has software. You should be concerned about what does this mean for our users? How do we get updates to them securely if these top tier companies have had problems in the past due to nation state attackers in many cases? There's lots and lots of examples of this. I could literally give this entire 15-minute slot talking through different examples of this. I will say that when nation states want to attack other nations, like allegedly the US and allegedly Israel wanting to go after Iran centrifuges, or you have situations where you have allegedly North Korea going after South Korea, or allegedly Russia going after Ukraine, as just happened a few months ago through the NotPetya attacks for NYCDOT. These attacks all are launched using software update as an attack mechanism because it's such an easy way to get into systems. And systems that we care about, I am going to be talking about in this talk, are automobiles. It's exactly this big, complicated mess you have here, where, for those of you who don't know, your car, if you have a relatively new car, you have between 50 and 100 little computers in your car. When you go to pull on your seatbelt to tighten it, and it sometimes tightens and sometimes doesn't, there's a little microcontroller inside of there that's running software. And if an attacker can go and get access to that little microcontroller, and they find a bug in there, or find a bug in really anything else in your car like that, they can often do things like disable your brakes, okay? Which is really scary, okay? So cars are very, very dangerous, and we've seen this time and time again. There have been attacks on cars by researchers really all over the world, from research labs that have been published, and you know that nation states are paying a lot of attention to this and likely have these capabilities as well. They can do all the sorts of things I talked about here, controlling brakes, applying brakes at speed, you're going as fast as you want, just turning off the transmission, locking you in the car. So you can imagine ransomware in the future where you get into a vehicle and you're driving down the highway and all of a sudden, your little infotainment unit comes up and says, you better get on your phone and start giving us some money in Bitcoin, or we're going to disable your brakes. And if you try to slow down below 30 miles an hour, we're just going to, accelerate you to 100 and disable. It's completely plausible and possible to do. Cars are extremely dangerous, weapons today, and if these sorts of issues are not fixed, people will die, and frankly, lots of them will. So that is what has made me passionate about working on this problem. By the way, I also want to say, if you think you build software that doesn't require updates, you're basically wrong. Just for everybody there, so you get that little annoying pop-up that comes up and says, hey, we want to restart your computer because of updates or whatever else. Absolutely apply those updates. So let me go ahead to jump ahead a little bit to this slide in the interest of time. I know you can't really read this graph. What I'll say is that they asked a bunch of novice security users and they asked a bunch of security experts, what should you do to keep your system secure? And the number one thing that novice users, like non-security experts, said was use antivirus, use strong passwords, things like this, because, well, the antivirus companies want to sell you antivirus software. They asked experts the same question, and the number one thing that experts said was apply software updates. Right? That is absolutely the number one thing that you can do and that your users should be doing to remain secure. Because anytime you have an update, it's effectively, that annoying little box is telling you, attackers can get into your computer right now. Please let us restart so we can fix it. Okay? All right. And if you think about the capabilities of nation-state actors, which are even greater than you have for a lot of these other organizations, they're able to do things like break into servers. It looks like allegedly Russian attackers broke into servers at NYCDOT to launch this big attack that took out major industry across all of Ukraine and also hit a lot of US companies that were using the same software that you may have heard about. Merck and a lot of hospitals in Britain and other places like that were in the news for being attacked. And effectively what happened is that a bad person got into one server and was able to leverage that server that was providing updates, able to leverage that access to attack massive numbers of computers. And that's really the issue that all those companies, Red Hat, Google, Microsoft, that we saw on that first slide that they had, is they kind of put all their eggs in one basket. And this is, in general, a bad idea. Okay, so there's lots of different types of attacks. I'm not really going to go through this. Literally, I could, once again, give a 15-minute talk about dozens of these. But in general, you need to make it so that you have a way for users to do the sorts of things, the operators that are producing the updates, to be able to produce these updates in a way that isn't a burden to them. It shouldn't be a complicated, difficult process, or else nobody will use it. So you do all the same sorts of things that you're doing today, but perhaps you also cryptographically sign the updates that you produce, and maybe your server signs updates as well as the development team that produces those updates. And then just with some mechanisms like that and some software that helps to make that easier for you, you may be able to have a great impact because you can get away from this sort of single point of failure. So that's part of the work that I've been doing over quite a long time. I designed something back in 2009 called the Update Framework Tough. It's used very widely in the cloud. Docker, IBM, Microsoft, Red Hat, dozens of companies use it. In the cloud, it's actually adopted by the Linux Foundation. It's the standardized way to secure software updates in the cloud. And it has a lot of design principles that make it so that even if a bad person gets into your infrastructure and steals some keys or does things, the security of the system gracefully degrades. So in other words, if they break into this server that you use to give updates to your clients, they might be able to do something like tell a client, there actually hasn't been an update in the last day, when there has been. But they wouldn't be able to tell the client, this evil file that I just created in my hacker basement is a valid update, please install it. Okay, does that make sense? So it gracefully degrades in terms of how this works. And we do that through a bunch of different mechanisms that, once again, in order to have a little bit of, to be able to make it through and talk about different things, I'm going to breeze through a bit. And we've been working with folks in the automotive industry over the last 3.5 years or so to do an automotive version of this updater, where you go and you have vehicles that are go and you run a little bit of software inside of the ECUs, the little computers inside your car, the things in your seatbelt tensioner and your entertainment unit and really everything else in your car, your brakes and so on. And they install a little bit of software on the servers that they already have in the car company they use to make updates. And it's intentionally designed to be easy for operators, easy for OEMs, easy for everybody to go and use. And fortunately, we've also done this via an open design. Everything we've done is completely publicly available. It's free to every company for free. No automotive companies had to pay us to do any of this work. Really our goal, as I said before, is to save people's lives. People will die if they don't have the system. So we were fortunate enough to get some funding from the Department of Homeland Security, which enabled us to go and do this work. And there's actually multiple implementations, some by our group, some by different vendors that have gone and made these products. They're all free, open source. You can find them linked off of our site. We also have an open standards process. We're in the process of getting an IEEE ISO standard. We formed a nonprofit around this. And if anyone here works in automotive or has a company that creates products that go inside of cars, we'd be very happy to have you to join. In our very first meeting, we had 78% of security representatives from companies that represent 78% of the cars on US roads from the OEM side there. And that number has grown over time. So we'd be very happy to have anybody join. Once again, there's no cost to this. It's the standard and everything else with it is completely free. We've had a lot of different security reviews that have all been very positive that we also make available. And I'm very happy to say that also our efforts have actually been integrated into forthcoming cars for one of the big 3 US automakers and major OEMs in Asia, and we have a lot of other integrations that are in progress now. We're also part of something called Automotive Grade Linux, which is a Linux distribution specially designed for cars. We've been in there for quite a while due to the works of one of our vendors that makes Optane. And it's, big feedback we've had from OEMs that have gone and started to do the integration and adopters is it's super easy to integrate. It's the kind of thing that they just work into their procedure. And making any change to a big entrenched system takes a little bit of time, but once they make the change and get it in, it's one of these things you get in your system, you almost forget it's there until something bad happens, and then you're like, oh my gosh, it's really good we had this here. And also, you can read a lot about this in the press. One of the implementations of this was named New Product of the Year by Ubiquity, and Popular Science named this one of the year's most important innovations in security last year. So if you're interested in this or you want to learn more, we hold workshops. We're happy to do technology demonstrations. There's lots else going around here. And there's a URL and my email address here, and I'd be happy to take any questions or follow-on related to this. Thank you. Yes?
This may be a little off subject, so you can tell me if it is. What is the legal status of hacking as an act? Is this a federal crime or a state subject? And if it's a federal crime, which agency has the first obligation to investigate and prosecute the bad act?
So I'm not a lawyer. My understanding, so there are federal laws against this, but I don't understand jurisdictionally who has first rights over specific incidents. So I think I'll just punt that question. Any other questions?
So, just one question. You said it's all open source, so hackers also have access to the code that you write. So
yeah, that's true. In fact, some of the groups that have hacked automobiles have also done security audits for us. And they told us that, hey, this looks really good, we can't find a way to hack it. So if you think about something making it closed source, oh, this must be harder because the hackers will have a hard time. That's basically not true, okay? If you have really good like nation state level cryptographers like the NSA or like the Chinese government or the Russian government hackers and cryptographers designing a crypto system for you, then that might be true. But I'll tell you that that isn't true even for the companies, the big companies that are on those first slides. So I've done work under NDA with companies like that, where they bring in outside experts and they try to incorporate things that are public and have been publicly reviewed. So I think closed crypto especially, and anything related to security design, you should be much more skeptical than something that's had heavy audits.
thank you very much.
Oh, wait, one more. Sorry, go ahead.
One question.
Yeah.
Do you need to have all the sensors and the control devices and be able to be on one network? That network is interfacing with the internet.
Okay, yeah, this is
Can we isolate?
Yeah.
Say, okay, we have independent devices, safety devices, will not touch the internet, and
Yeah.
there is can some information.
So thank you. I love this question, by the way, because you got to something I glossed over. So inside of a car, there are separate networks, and actually, somewhat surprisingly to those of you who know how modern networks work, they're mostly bus networks inside of cars. So the gray hairs in here probably know what I'm talking about, and everybody who doesn't have gray hair probably is confused. But it's a really old networking standard that was really only popular, hasn't been popular since like the late 90s or early 2000s. But it's a broadcast mechanism where everybody on a segment of network talks, and whenever someone talks, everyone can hear every message. It's not like switched networking you have today, where you talk to a switch that then decides how to direct the messages. And anyway, okay, so getting to the question you're asking though, is that can't you just segment off things onto a separate bus? So you have all the safety critical things on one bus and the non-safety critical on another. And the problem is that that sounds good in practice for the same reason that things like firewalls sound good in practice. Because, hey, I just put up a firewall, I put the bad guys over here, the good guys are here. But there is actually a lot of chatter that has to go between the two. Because, for instance, your infotainment sensor displays rear-facing camera information as you're backing up in your car, and maybe things are also supposed to perhaps detect, and you do recognition to figure out if you're going to hit something so it can stop. So information naturally has to flow between these networks, and attackers are very, very adept at taking small information flows or things like that and turning them into massive leaks. So I would say that I'm skeptical in general of, personally I'm skeptical in general that just trying to segment it out is a solution. I think it's better than not having it segmented, but I think you still have a lot to worry about. Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
So our last speaker for this session is Professor Siddharth. He's an assistant professor at NYCDOT Electrical and Computer Engineering, and he'll talk about security vulnerabilities in machine learning-based autonomous driving systems. Before we go to his talk, there are a lot of nice student posters and demonstrations outside. So when you go out, get a coffee, grab something to eat, talk to them. They're very interesting work, and you ask questions, and you also engaged. So I strongly suggest that spend a few minutes with the posters. They're as interesting as our speakers. So with that,
All right, so thank you, Kaan, for the invitation. My name is Siddharth Garg. If Justin hasn't scared you already about the many different ways in which your car can be hacked, I'm here to scare you even more. So I'll talk about security vulnerabilities, but in the context of machine learning-based autonomous driving systems that were alluded to in the first talk. Why are we discussing machine learning? Because in the last 5 years, there's been a revolution of sorts in machine learning technology, heralded by the use of what I refer to as deep learning-based mechanisms. What I'm showing here on this slide is a machine learning challenge referred to as ImageNet, where contestants were tasked with trying to identify the categories for all of these different images. For instance, human beings can look at this image and see that it's a leopard, but can machines do the same? And what happened is, for the first few years of the challenge, traditional machine learning techniques were the best in class. And then starting 2012, these green dots, these represent systems based on deep learning, started appearing. And you can see that even in the first iteration, the deep learning-based systems were significantly better than conventional systems. And deep learning as a machine learning technology has continued to grow from strength to strength. And by some reporting, has achieved near human performance. So on these types of ImageNet-like challenges, deep learning-based computer vision systems can perform as well as human beings can in determining, for instance, object categories. Now, as a consequence, deep learning has found a wide range of applications. This includes autonomous driving systems, which are the topic of today's talk, but also in medicine, the physical sciences, and arts and entertainment. I'm not going to discuss these today. I'll focus a little bit more on the application of deep learning to autonomous driving, and more specifically on what new security vulnerabilities such applications might introduce. Now, deep learning systems are quite powerful, as evidenced by the fact that they've achieved near human performance on a variety of recognition tasks, but are also very complex. And because they're complex, they're not yet fully understood. As a consequence, whenever you deploy an engineering system for which the underlying physics are not fully understood, there are opportunities for hackers, attackers to take advantage of that. So I'm going to try and elucidate some of those opportunities that hackers might have. Now, this is work starting. This was work published almost 4 years back now, still unaddressed. So here's a simple problem, right? So if you show an AI system, a modern AI system based on deep learning, a picture of Eva Longoria, and ask this AI system, is this Eva Longoria? It comes back and says yes. All right. Now, I can show the same AI system a slightly different image. In fact, the two images are look, at least perceptually, the same to everybody in this room, but actually very slightly different. And I can show this slightly modified image to the same AI system and ask the same question, which is this Eva Longoria? And the same AI system that said yes to the first question says no to the second. Although to everybody in this room, these two images are imperceptibly different. They are actually different, so I'm plotting here a picture that is the difference, the pixelated difference between these two images, and you see that there are some differences around the eye region, the nose region, but these differences are not perceptible to human beings and shouldn't really fool AI systems, but they do. And then you ask, well, why is that? And the answer is, we don't know. We don't know because these systems are complex and poorly understood. So there is a lot of work happening in trying to understand AI systems, and specifically deep learning better, but the answer to this question, for instance, is still quite wide open. And so I view these as analogous to bugs in software systems. So we've known for the last 30, 40 years that software deployments can have bugs that can be exploited by adversaries for malicious intent. Bugs are essentially unintentional consequences that the developer did not intend to happen. And similarly, when you train an AI model, we find that there are these artifacts, these unintentional consequences. And although there has been now 5 years of work on this, there is still no silver bullet. There is no solution that I know of that can guarantee that these types of unintentional backdoors do not exist for attackers to exploit. Now, this is in the context of image recognition. Simple questions like, is this Eva Longoria? You can imagine that this might have implications for biometric authentication systems. But what about autonomous driving? So this is work from Berkeley in Michigan, published a couple of years ago, that showed how, by essentially plastering traffic signs with very cleverly chosen stickers, you can see examples of stickers here, you can get these traffic signs to be mispredicted. So example, stop signs being confused as speed limit signs. And that indeed these mispredictions would happen even if the stop signs were viewed from varying distances and angles, right? And these are the kinds of machine learning systems that we think will be deployed in autonomous driving vehicles. So these are significant security vulnerabilities that need to be addressed. We have done some of our own experiments here at NYU with a small, huge unmanned ground vehicle that we developed here in Professor Farshad Karami's lab. And we've replicated these experiments. So we've been able to show that these unmanned ground vehicles can be fooled using these adversarial examples. So I'll just show you a quick demo. And I'm going to forward to the relevant part, which is around here. So I'll show you. And so what you're going to see here are two experiments. The first on the left, our UGV is just navigating normally. On the one on the right, it's getting inputs that are minutely perturbed in a way that is imperceptible. And I'm not sure if, let me just run that very briefly again. The UGV on the right, as you will notice, actually does not, oops. All right, you know what? Let's just do one last try and then I'll skip it. Right, the UGV on the right is going to run into a wall, essentially, because the inputs that it's getting, the LiDAR inputs that it's getting, are very minutely perturbed. Not in a way that can be that is visible to you all, but there are small changes on the wall that cause the UGV to go straight and hit the wall. Right? So these are the types of attacks that we envision might happen if we deploy machine learning systems without security analysis, without security validation in the future. Now, what I showed you so far has been what we view as analogous to bugs in software systems. These are unintended backdoors or unintended ways that attackers might exploit the system. But we've also started looking at intentional modifications of machine learning systems to enable attackers to get a foothold. Right? So why is that possible? Well, it turns out that, in fact, even now, because machine learning models are hard and expensive to train, most deployments actually start from a model that they download from a source on the internet. So there are these so-called model zoos. There are several very popular ones that host machine learning models. And the idea is that you download one of these models, right, and then retrain the model to suit your needs. But the problem, of course, is what if the model that is downloaded is backdoored from the very start? Right? And that's one of the things that we've been concerned about. So imagine that you have a benign neural network. This is a non-maliciously trained neural network. And the idea is an attacker may be able to modify this network, in this case by inserting these red neurons, in such a way that the bad net or the backdoor network behaves as expected when it sees regular inputs. In this case, this is a digit recognition task, so regular inputs contain images and digits. Right? And so you can see that the benign and the backdoor network both output 7. But when the bad net sees inputs that have backdoors, in this rather cartoon example, the backdoor is a certain pattern of pixels in the bottom right corner of the image. It is trained to mispredict. So in this case, you can see that the backdoor network outputs an 8. Okay? And similarly, you can think about attacks in autonomous driving systems. This is a stop sign just a couple of blocks from here, right behind my building. And in this case, we trained a backdoor network to misclassify stop signs as speed limit signs when there were post-it notes stuck on them. So you can see that there's a post-it note here, which I actually stuck as some error in my permanent residence application. But once you put this post-it note in the stop sign, you can see that it gets predicted as a speed limit sign. And now, compared to the bugs that I was discussing previously, these types of backdoors can be designed by the attacker. So the attacker can choose what kind of sticker, what kind of post-it note is going to trigger this misclassification. I'll skip over the experimental results, but I just want to summarize them by saying that in fact these types of attacks are effective and can be implemented with great accuracy. We also think that these types of attacks can happen in the real world. The reason is that the online model zoos that are used currently to share machine learning models actually are not particularly concerned, at least currently, about security. So, for example, consider a setting where I want to download a model from an online model zoo. The model that is uploaded on the model zoo, this is some website, is actually benign. But a man in the middle, attacker, is able to modify the model in transit while I'm downloading, such that it has this backdoor functionality. Now, the traditional approach that is used by software systems is to use digital signatures. Right? So essentially, the website is going to post a digital signature of the software, and once you download it, you can compute a signature of the software that you've downloaded and compare with the one that you find on the website. If the two match, then you use the software, otherwise it's been modified in transit. So in that, indeed, we found that these online model repositories do actually store signatures of the models that they're hosting. But it turns out that because they're not particularly concerned currently about security, those signatures don't match. So when we downloaded a model from the online model zoo and computed the signature locally, it didn't match with the one that was being posted by the repository. And this, again, opens up a whole host of vulnerabilities that attackers, adversaries can exploit even today. And again, these models that are hosted in these online repositories are being used both by academics and by commercial entities. So this is a significant insight that we've highlighted through these models. So one solution, and this should be an obvious one, is for machine learning vendors to adopt the best practices. For example, the types of things that Justin was speaking about. From the software supply chain, the best practices that are used to secure the software supply chain should be used to also secure this evolving machine learning model supply chain. To conclude, we've also been looking at specific mechanisms that users can use to ensure the integrity of the models that they download. One of these mechanisms involves some recent observations that we have made about the behavior of these backdoors. We found that backdoor inputs tend to activate parts of a neural network, in this case, specific types of neurons that are unactivated by clean inputs. And if you're able to identify and remove these backdoor neurons, then you might be able to essentially scrub your machine learning model free of these types of backdoor behaviors. We have a paper about this, which I'm happy to talk about in more detail, that showed up last year at a Cybersecurity conference. And we're able to show that attacks can be, these types of attacks, in many cases, can be disabled without significantly compromising the accuracy of the underlying machine learning system. And so with that, I will conclude and see if there are any questions.
Now we can take questions for Sid and other panelists. If we have time, we run out of time, so I'll take questions.
Well, aren't you just saying that your AI models aren't any good?
No, that is
Really, I mean, if I have a F equals MA and I then do F equals MA squared because I put a squared in the model, guess what? I don't get the same results. So.
No, I think that's too simplistic. I think that's too simplistic a summary, I think, right? So AI models, as I said, for a large class of inputs appear to work very well. The most recent ones.
They don't. I mean,
right. For a large class of inputs appear to work very well. There are, unfortunately, the input space is so large. There are inputs for which these AI models currently don't work as well as we hope. Now, for those types of inputs, less complex models may actually be preferable. So one of the things that you have to think about is as you move towards more complex systems, you get benefits in terms of accuracy and so on average case inputs, but you can craft special inputs for which they misbehave. It's ongoing research, which I don't think is unaddressable, but we have to look at.
I disagree.
I'm not sure what I'm thinking about.
Yeah. You have an if statement, if less than or equal is this. And and you found a little situation in which the 18th decimal place change and whatever. I mean, it just, never mind. I argue with my students about this.
Hey, how you doing? This is coming from someone without a particularly technical background, but I was definitely intrigued by the misclassification of that post stop sign. When you're looking at that as something like a real-world attack, would that typically, would the owner of the software code typically know what the problem is, or would it be just latent until all
This is one of the biggest challenges. So the other property that modern machine learning systems have is that they have millions, if not billions, of parameters, essentially weights that are trained, and it's quite hard to introspect. So to look at these billions of parameters and identify what each one of them does. This is the equivalent of debugging software, right? So the equivalent of debugging neural networks is to look at weights of the neural network and identify what purpose each of those weights serves. And that we don't know how to do yet either. Consequently, it is potentially easy for attackers to modify a few weights that have these unintended consequences without somebody being able to. And at the same time, you can't really sit and look at those billion parameters and say, hey, these ones seem fishy. It's something that is ongoing work. We're working with Google and several other companies have been looking at ways to introspect and debug machine learning models.
I think one thing that I would like to add, there was a nice presentation I think last year by a famous French mathematician about what we know about deep learning from a mathematical perspective. And we don't know much. I mean, it's a classifier algorithm, it classifies things, but we don't really understand mathematically when it works and when it doesn't.
So going back to the previous question, and this is what I want to point out, which is that we don't know yet, but I don't think that it's an unsolvable problem. I think this is only more motivation to understand the mathematical principles of deep learning better. And there are several efforts in that direction that are yet not sophisticated to address these types of vulnerabilities, but will be, in my experience, or at least in my opinion.
So from an engineering perspective, you want things to work. You don't really care much about the mathematical proof, but there is an underlying assumption that it always works, which is not true. It must not work sometimes.
So I think when deploying these modern safety critical systems, essentially what we need to do is to throw strong formal verification and validation approaches before we are ever willing to let these types of systems make their way into a car, for example.
Any other questions for?
I just saw that DARPA has started a program that attempts to do that verification and validation system for these systems that nobody knows what's going on inside.
Correct.
Is that doable? I mean, theoretically, or?
Yeah. So there is an ongoing effort in using formal verification techniques to check properties of these systems. And so one property could be that if I show you a picture of a car or a road, and then say modify every pixel by 2 digits, it should the output should still say it's a road, right? Now, currently, we cannot verify the systems at the scale that we need. So you can verify systems with thousands or hundreds of thousands of neurons, but not with millions of neurons. But again, that's ongoing work. I think eventually, if we were to deploy them, we do need to be able to verify them at the scale of millions of neurons. In parallel, there's work on designing systems that are secure by construction. And again, those types of systems...
Secure by construction?
Secure by construction. So you design them with the principles, with some underlying principles in mind. And again, it turns out that training those systems is possible, but we can't train, again, systems with millions or billions of parameters yet. That's ongoing work.
So it's just a matter of scale. It's not a theoretical issue.
It's a matter of scale, right? It's a matter of scaling of the verification. Well, when it comes to verification, though, there's a more fundamental problem about specifying properties. So if I wanted to say that I want to make sure that my car works in all weather conditions, okay, how do I mathematically describe all weather conditions? Indeed, this notion of not having a formal property is why we need AI in the first place, right? There's no way that we can write down a set of rules that specifies what all weather conditions mean. Which is why the problem is somewhat imposed to begin with. But that is the nature of the beast anyway, right? I mean, even human beings, when they make mistakes because they're...
Is that going to convince insurance companies?
Any other questions for Sid or other speakers? So with that, I would like to thank all the panelists.